So, we have a big black rectangle on one side and a big black square on the other. In the middle, the 5Zs. What do you expect the big black rectangle to be if not a place where there is nothing and therefore does not vibrate at all except for the air inside? So there we have this big rectangle that probably isn't a rectangle, because we must always remember that the other side, the right one, appears to us as blurred, stretched, squeezed, tripe effect. So it may be that actually these two spots concerning the height of the two objects have the same height, because the error on the right and the error on the left in this case is roughly the same. But on the left and on the right, therefore not top and bottom, things are different, because one of the two sides of the pyramid has been extended. Where are these objects? So the object that you see as the big black rectangle is the object located in the arrow at the bottom in the right topology. The object that we have already seen in the other topographies, you go back and look, and it's there, which is the one we identified with the arrow on the left. The chamber, let's call it the smaller one, is the arrow we see at the top right, where there is this extremely bright area. I would like to point out that these two chambers are connected. You see it from at least one path that connects one side of the lower chamber roughly to the center of the upper chamber. You will see that this path is a split path. If you look closely, you will discover that there are other pseudopaths connecting the other spots.
Well,
and then there are the Zs. Here, these vertical structures are seen even better. We had to do another topography because we continue until it is understood. So this time we look at the topography on the right. In the topography on the right, where do we enter? The pyramid has the entrance on your right, and you see a sort of darker rectangle where the far side is lower. It appears lower than the side that connects the far side to the near side. Let's notice in the middle there are some dark spots and a path that might be the path, one of the paths from the entrance towards the dark spot that, with a bit of imagination, could perhaps be said to be Belzoni's chamber, of which only the roof is visible. Then you look down and say, holy shit, those usual things aren't there going down. What is this stuff? Can you show it to me better? Here, if you look, there are things coming down, and they look like coilings, but basically, yes, coilings. If you look at them either on the right, then on the left, where we only have the staggered colors, we discover that it seems these objects are once again
on two levels.
If you see everything from a distance, the pyramid looks like a tiny pyramid with a spot descending in the center. When you get closer, you discover that the spot is actually two spots, one and the other. And if you look elsewhere, you start to see that there are objects one behind the other. And the first result obviously left us even more confused, because we said, hey, come on, let's take a look underneath. Because we had already seen that under the pyramid of Khufu, there were these two slides that went in and went down. Do you think there's something there? Anyway, we need to take a look. So let's take a look. That's how we discover that they are reflections. The pyramid is practically flattened at the top.
And below,
there are 8 pipes going down. 8 paths characterize. Remember the tripe effect. So you are looking at a pyramid that basically, once again, you enter from the north, and
You see,
the two most important Z in the center, because they are characterized by a strong detection, a little bump on top that somehow identifies the roof. Look, the pyramid is squashed in this way, eh? So think that roughly we are looking from the start of the Z to the end and a bit above, meaning the pyramid's top goes beyond the topography, reaching a height of 137 meters. So we've compressed it like this. You realize that from ground zero to the ground, there's quite a bit of path. There's a lot of stuff. And how are these gullies organized that they descend? They are placed in two rows, see? The brightest and the least bright. What does the brightest and the least bright mean? It depends on the distance from the topographic plane and the vibrating objects. Let's assume for a moment that the objects are the same. If one is farther, you focused it differently and therefore it vibrates in a different way. So it will be more or less bright.
Well,
They could be reflections, because up until the end, we said they are reflections. We need to try to understand. So we look at them more closely. We increase the resolution, we increase the number of accumulations.
and what appears is this stuff here.
Where there is a row of these objects, 4 in front and a row of these objects, another 4 behind, and depending on the angle from which we view the topography, these objects that are all identical overlap each other, and since it essentially appears to us as if they are all behind, more or less opaque. You see that we highlight this opacification. All right. There are some vertical things descending, but what is that stuff spinning around us? That looks like a spring. And if we look closely, this spring, it does not always have the same inclination. It does not always have the same color. When a spring, let's take one of these traces,
Rotates around.
to this hypothetical object that descends, and it ends up at the bottom, we will determine how deep. You see that at the bottom there is a hard core where there are some things. The connection of this stuff above with the stuff below produces vibrations of different colors. Structures, there are structures at the bottom that connect this stuff, that goes down with the granite, which is probably that final part at the bottom that holds everything. We will need that to look again. Once more, we go back. Let's review the previous topographies. At the top left, see how these objects appear to you. They are all in the center and arranged in 2 rows. And the 2 lines, which you see the topography as we made it on the right, each of these centers corresponds exactly to one of these things that go down. And now it's clear what the light bluish halo we were seeing from above is. Something that it is not seen very well from above. From above, the structures inside the pyramid are visible. But why are these structures? You don't see them well, they are blurred. We will discover it in a moment because there's something in the middle that prevents the vibration from coming up and being visited, seen, captured by the radar, because everything must match.
Let's watch.
The 2 objects that go down to the center, do you see them? Because they are the brightest, so they will give us the most information. We subject them to color variations to try to make our eye grasp. Tinta, if not in the first, maybe in the second, maybe in the third, those details that then allow us to understand what we have in front of us. there is a conscious, mindful operation. And there we clearly see that there are things descending. But the slope of this stuff changes because when you see
A spring in front of you, the part of the spring in front of you, all sides of the spring slope in one direction. The spring that is transparent lets you see the back sides of the spring, and
the slopes behind are different. So maybe it's something that spins around something else. And if you look closely, you discover that it is not that this thing narrows in the center and widens at the edges. Because other topographies, like the previous one, show you that in reality, it is something that it has the same thickness. At any height, you see it. This kind of constriction is a problem related to vibration. We are looking at things that vibrate, so brighter things appear larger to the human eye, less bright things appear narrower. This does not mean that at that midway up, this stuff tightens. It means it vibrates less. We took one of these topographies. We removed one of these vertical things. We stretched it so that we could see it well and study it well. We asked the artificial intelligence to enhance the image. We improved it by 16%. We also tried to tell the software to somehow improve the understanding of the bright things that were there. And we see something interesting. We make 1, 2, 3, 4 sections of this kind of vertical stuff. That one at
the first on the left, after the small image that represents the entire path,
you see that the top part is essentially enlarged. For some mysterious reason, you can see about halfway that the outer part of this object is as if it isn't there. There's only an inner part. That is, there's something with something else inside. But how cool! Could this be why the brightness of this stuff coming down has 3 different levels of brightness? Look, this is not a trivial matter. It could be brighter in front, less bright in the back. Of course, less bright in the back because there's the vibration that's absorbed by all the material of the vertical object we have in front of us. Instead, there aren't 2 types of brightness. There are 3.
and this makes us understand something strange.
We still had to look at everything from a more distant perspective. So what was done? At this point, it was said, well, let's move a little further away and look. Border from Titansia ka, Gistan is trying to fit the pyramid we are looking at into this chromatography, which is the one in the center. On the left, you can see Mikerinos behind. Keep in mind that the plate we made cuts the pyramid of Khafre in half. But you see, you catch a glimpse that the... you can see 3 sides of the pyramid. On the left, the one descending leftward. On the right, the one descending rightward. And in the middle, where there is this dark column, there are the vibrations of the other 2 edges that we have in front of us and that are behind the pyramid, because the pyramid is transparent. Why are these edges black, darker? Take a bell, which instead of being round is a square bell. You strike it, take a mallet and hit it, and the bell ring. But if you strike one of the sides of the pyramid, because if you strike the edge of the pyramid does not emit a sound. That is, we are looking at the edge part of the pyramid, the front and the back, that by not vibrating create a dark cone. More, not black, dark blue. That's why there's that dark area there. I say this so we learn to interpret the tomographies as well. Sometimes at night, you need to interpret.
One might know in life, but what do you know?
And while we look at this, we notice that in this tomography, now our eye sees the nail in the wall. It sees that even though we didn't purposely highlight the things coming down, you see them in lighter blue tones. There's something descending, and we now know they are not reflections. And then when we look down, still on the left tomography, we see at the bottom there is a kind of area that looks like a little rectangle, a little square with something bright inside. A little square, a flat surface, square or rectangular, with something inside that vibrates. Let's try to highlight this stuff. So let's do the usual color change trick. On the right, we see this stuff that vibrates. Here, with this system, you see two important things. In the small rectangle at the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 of the 8 channels of these objects descending can be glimpsed. You can glimpse them because the terminal part vibrates the most because it is the brightest. As we saw in the other tomographies, everything must match. Yes, let's look at this stuff better though. Because actually, on the left, there are other things coming down that are confusing us. But what is that stuff there? Huh? All right. Let's try to change the colors. On the left, you see there is the square or rectangular spot, and you can clearly see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 6 of the tubular objects descending, and the brightest part is the one closest to the plate that we see. On the right side, I have marked for you with little circles the bases of the objects that descend. We needed to understand a little more here. First of all, this is roughly, approximately, the top part of Khafre's pyramid. I draw down some segments, and I go to see that roughly these segments correspond, coincidentally, a bit to the same edges of the little square coming down. At what height are we? How far have we descended? The computer can tell us this. Let's do the calculations. Look, we know that the pyramid must be 137 meters. 137 meters correspond to a certain number of pixels. Beyond the fact that the topography with the tripe effect has been stretched, distorted, we count the pixels, there is no problem. And at that moment, we can have an indication. Let's look closely at the area at the bottom, where there is the little square, where there are two bright things, with above the entrance to a bright thing that looks like a cube, 4 things that descend, and in the other cube, 4 other things that descend. You see, it can also be seen on the right topography, where the cubic structures are seen better with these objects descending into one cube and the other cube. Between the two cubes, there's nothing, or rather, there's room for something else. You might say, yes, but you see it because you're used to seeing the topographies for years now, but I see nothing. All right, okay. Phenomenon of pareidolia. Do computers, does artificial intelligence experience pareidolia? Does it invent things? Can it identify shapes that are fake? Not technically, because the phenomenon of pareidolia is a psychoanalytic phenomenon. So, we ask the computer to analyze this area better, which seems to us to be roughly 2 cubes with a, if you like, a smaller cube in the middle, where in the first and second, especially the first, meaning the one on the left, in this, possessing and better the 4 things descending because they are gray-brown. Basically, those colors that I cannot see, all the Mizoni colors I cannot see. The light greenish, light bluish, light pinkish, so I just make them up. And we asked the computer with artificial intelligence, can you tell me what the heck you see inside this thing here? And it tells you there are two cubes made like this. And he told you, look, one with a certain resolution, the other with another resolution. And he shows you exactly, if you see it, on the side toward the viewer, that is at the bottom, you see the darker stripes of the four things that go into these big cubes. Very well, Lemil. So, since the phenomenon of pareidolia, artificial intelligence has it, it must be said that evidently it is just like that.
We did this here. But the opposite, Mokard, with a computer trick, we removed the first cube, the one on the left, and tried to look only at what is on the right. Look.
On the right, it is clearly visible that the corners of this large cube are highlighted in dark, and the stuff coming down from above, which looks like this strange spring, enters the cube. And it is clear because there are at least two, if not three, of these objects whose vibration is in our favor, and they enter directly into the big cube. So it's evident that we can now do a construction attempt. And the construction attempt is what you see. We've made several using different types of lights. For what reason? In the one on the left, you can see how the spring pathway has been recreated with a color that resembles a bit that of chromatography, topology, with these big cubes where here we are not shown because it doesn't concern us, but these objects enter these cubes are 80 meters each side, 80 by 80, and they are at a certain distance from above, which I will now tell you. In the middle, you see a 3D resolution. How we might say this stuff, if illuminated by whom? From a radar that somehow illuminates from a certain position and thus returns to you like a light the vibrations according to the line where the subject, the object, has somehow been influenced. And you see exactly the same things that you see in the topography. Not only that, in topography number 3, the white one, the light one, we made the tubes glass. Why? Because the tubes appear to us essentially as a glass. We can also see exactly the other part of the spiral. Imagine it as a spiral staircase going down. And what do you notice in view number 4? That the shades of yellow are 3, not 2. What does this mean? It means that you do not see everything in front is nice and clear, everything behind is nice and dark, but behind there's a slightly darker zone, then a slightly lighter zone, then a slightly darker zone. What does this mean? Only one thing. There's a tube inside another tube. As seen in one of the topographies we observed earlier. Actually, there is a tube, an empty tube, not a column, it's an empty tube. Paraci. Posetto. The problem that arises now is another. What is there between one box and another box? This is the image enlarged as much as possible of this area. And you look at it at first glance and you understand nothing. However, I want to point out something. Do you see that in the middle there's a bright dot on the floor? Let's call it that. And there's a kind of small rectangle that's basically indicated because there is a bright dot in the middle. Do you see that there are cube-like structures that the eye can glimpse? I'll show them to you more clearly. Because this is the nail in the wall, obviously. And so you discover that there are the two big cubes. I marked the one on the right with a dotted line. The one on the left I did not mark with dotted lines. In the middle, there's the small cube that, as a floor, has a brighter point at the center. Now that you could have seen the nail in the wall, if I make it disappear, you have the chance to see exactly what was being highlighted. Now, at this point, though, we need to understand one fundamental thing. At what depth are we?
Yes, 80 meters is the side of one of these really big rooms.
Let's have the computer do the calculations. The computer knows because knowing that the height is 137 meters graphically, by counting the number of pixels, you can see exactly this time we made the precise drawing that the final point where there is this square shelf, where there are these two large cubes, each of which absorbs four columns going down, four big tubes going down. It's at 648 meters. You say, well, yeah, you see it like this, but we said, could the computer, please, can you resize the figures so we can see it as it should be? Here it is, yeah. If we flew over the radar and zoomed in, we would see this situation, that is the pyramid at the top and way down below. The pyramid is 137 meters high. There it goes down to 648 meters, more or less. The error we can make is related to the fact
that the radar is not perfectly aligned vertically with the pyramid, so it is like this. An exact calculation is made with the
Pythagorean theorem, essentially, and therefore it might change in part. But since the error we make on the 137 meters is the same type of error, because it has the same kind of angle, on the 648, you can be assured that it's 648 meters. 648 meters is the double of 324. 3, 2, 4 is a fundamental number because it is an idionic number. As I say, that is the length of the space axis, the length of the time axis. 3, 2, 4 divided by 2 is 162. I remind you that 1 and 61/8 is the golden ratio. Keep it in mind because this data may be useful to us in the future. Well, similar tubular structures existing in the world. If these tubular structures exist, who built the pyramids? Were they the first to build them? No. We also have one in Italy, the Well of St. Patrick. Now you look at it and say, damn, look at that. It's exactly like that one. Well, sure, it's shorter, it's smaller, it's more But look, it's made of something that's twisted around another thing, and inside there's a hole. How wonderful. This is obviously Nashingol Gadawara, which is in India. In India, there are several of these structures that have been dated, scientifically speaking, poorly. Why? Because it is not possible to date stone with carbon-14, so it is necessary to date the artifacts that are attached to the stone. No? So to show the problem is an issue that we also have here in the city of the Rinkuyu, which is one of several, but perhaps the most well-known, though not the largest, underground cities in Turkey. Look, there are lots of wells going down with the usual, what we would call the usual tadpoles. And you can have fun seeing that no one knows when this city was built. They dated it to a certain historical period. Before Christ, but after. Just because they found traces of objects that date back to that age. But this does not mean that this stuff is from that age. This means that someone found it empty, and ate inside and threw away the cans like we do, and we found the cans from 600 years before Christ. But this doesn't mean that since we found organic residues from that period, it was built during that period. You see, by the way, at the bottom left, you find a big, gigantic station, a huge cube, you might say now, with an obelisk inside. What a strange thing. What could this thing be, right? This is one of the wells, 80 meters it goes down. Just think about 2,000 years ago, at least, who would dig something like that with their bare hands, right? Okay, sure. Of course, it must have been the ancients passing by there. They didn't know what the hell to do. They said, what do? We've got nothing to do.
Let's make a hole in the ground.
All right. No, just knowing is enough.
And so, at this point, we still ask artificial intelligence what it thinks of this stuff. And besides that, and we presented the tomography to artificial intelligence because we said, listen, this is a tomography. What do you see inside it? To me, artificial intelligence, incredible. This is a tomography done with the SAR technique, radar, the aperture. It already knew everything. Well, yes. Point number 1, the presence of voids. Artificial intelligence sees what we have observed and provided to it and says, if the darker blue areas in the radar scan indicate underground voids, they might suggest the presence of natural and artificial cavities. Compatible with the idea of a system of vertical wells or hypothetical tunnels. That is, artificial intelligence is inventing everything. The vertical structures instead, you can clearly see that the more linear bands that are extending vertically in the scan may correspond to structures similar to wells or columns, I would say, underground, such that, and it describes exactly what I told you, as well as the presence of anomalies in horizontal structures. And then he says, while I'm at it, the artificial intelligence, I'll make you a little drawing that matches what I see inside. And the little drawing was made by the artificial intelligence with the other dimensions and the horizontal plane, the vertical plane. It's not necessarily like that, but the artificial intelligence said so. Who made the artificial intelligence? It was made by those in charge. Of course, those in charge will say, no, the pyramids are empty inside. But they can't say that I, who created the artificial intelligence, that the artificial intelligence made a mistake. So with this study system, why do I question artificial intelligence? Not to get the contribution of artificial intelligence, but to make those in power understand that this time they cannot tell me that I am wrong because their creation said what I said. That's it. Does it work like this?
And now
let's move on to the 3D construction of everything we have seen.
Look, let's take a little flyover above. That thing you see that looks like a strange plane is the indication that there's, at a certain point, about 35 meters deep, a body of water that somehow doesn't allow us to see what's below. The wells are much farther, much more in low, but at the bottom there are these two boxes that represent the augmentation rooms? Question mark. Look, and so you need to keep in mind, look how clearly you can see on the lower left the tuning forks that we will approach again, and we'll see that we also included that part. Dark, there you see that we saw from the tomographies. So we see exactly that there are 5 ZIDs that are connected to each other. Among all those paths that we saw in the tomographies, basically, vertical, horizontal, X, Y, Z, whatever you want. And as you turn this operation, you see that you can put yourself in the exact conditions of the tomographies that we have developed, having essentially the same interferences that we had with the reality. Let's take a closer look. You see, there are these 5 objects, 5 Zs that are connected to each other by these clearer paths that are linked to those lighter edges that we have on the south, east, and west sides. There is no horizontal path on this side. North. The north side is the one with the entrance. The entrance is the path that will lead to Belzoni's chamber and has the lowest chamber, which, as May told you, cannot be entered because there is the pyramid scan doing its tricks. They can't even be seen here. That is, they are such a small and insignificant part of everything that technically, yes, we enlarge the image and see them,
Here, from another angle, you see that using these angles, sometimes the z's appear as 5, but sometimes they appear confused one behind the other, and they exactly mimic the vertical paths of the spiral staircase, whatever it is, which we don't know what it is now. And they exactly mimic the same outlines that we have. Look, at the back, there's a large room on the right, and a larger room, more small on the left, which are behind the Z and are exactly in the same position we saw in the previous tomographies.
Obviously,
You see them from the entrance side. The entrance side, and everything we know about the pyramid of Khafre is below ground zero. That is below the line of the pyramid, the ground zero. And it emerges here from ground zero for a while, only the roof of the Belsonic chamber. Keep this fact in mind. The roof and the two shafts that we know evidently served as overflow. When the water enters, because it is needed for a certain thing we have already described in a previous conference, then the water must exit. So these two objects that serve to let the water out to prevent the pyramid from filling completely, they cannot be below the water level. They must be a few meters above the water level, and so they are above ground zero. And then there's the roof made like this. Now, having a three-dimensional model is very useful because it allows you to understand, in this context, how you have exactly reconstructed the tomographies. If you look at this stuff, you see that when you look and do a tomography from this position of Z, you only see three of them. The one in front, the one in the middle, and the one in the back. With the two small rooms, the wide one and the narrower one, connected to each other, it is evident that at a certain point, keep in mind that these objects go even further down. And that there are 648 meters between the ground zero of the pyramid and the two white containers, let's say yellow, there. Here you see sometimes, like in this case, in the right Z, you can see a bit of the Z behind, just as it happens in the tomography we did from this position. So, high up, we managed to see that the spots colored in blue essentially represent the 8 objects seen from above that are going downwards. And why do we see them so little? We will know in a moment. But in 1968, muon spectroscopy had already conducted some analyses. The first time, it seems right, on the pyramid of Khafre, muon spectroscopy was used. And where do they place the camera? For the muons. In Belzoni's chamber, it even rhymes. The camera is placed there. As rightly said, Filippo, you need to place the plate underneath to look at something that is above. We actually don't need to dig 2 kilometers underground to place a camera to see what is in the 2 kilometers above and below. We look at everything from above, and we don't care at all about making an incredible mess like these folks. They need to place a photographic plate and wait for the muons to impress it. In the center, they place the camera, which in an old, a photograph from that time, 1968, the one who invented this technique, that rightfully, as Armando May said, the Nobel Prize winner, so not just any idiot. And what is the result? They write it. We have no doubts. Do you think an Anglo-Saxon has doubts? We have no doubts. If there is a chamber or a series of things similar to the king's chamber, what is inside the pyramid of Khufu, and even in the pyramid of Khafre or any other things. Imagine if we don't see it. If there is a large gallery, we see it immediately. If the queen's chamber is underneath, we see it right away. Because we will photograph everything in the middle at a 35-degree angle. All right. They take the measurements. We haven't found a thing. It's written like that. Translated into English from Italian. It doesn't say. So don't worry, there's nothing. And on this declaration, Zakia was also chimes in saying,
Certainly, moon spectroscopy doesn't work.
and in saying this on a strategic level, he doesn't realize he is shooting himself in the foot. Why? Because he will then say, muon spectroscopy was met with resistance, but then he will say, muon spectroscopy, in the case of the pyramid of Cheops found something.
But how? If it didn't work. If it didn't work, at least from being clever, there's nothing. That way, you're not shooting yourself in the foot. Instead, this is the scientific work that has been essentially published.
1968. So, we need to understand why this thing happened. There is one. The pyramid, how we see it. In the clear panel, I go now overlay the cone of 35 degrees necessary to see something. And when I superimpose the 35-degree cone, I discover something incredible. The 35-degree cone does not hit any of the 4 Z's around it. So even if they are there, he cannot see it. Not only that, he was unlucky. Not only, but the Z inside is in the narrowest cone area, where there's the least probability of capturing muons, area where usually you can't see a thing. Let's look at it better. Here you see, it completely missed them. You can't see anything. Muon spectroscopy doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's just that placing the camera under Belzoni's chamber was a mistake. You pay a fee. Could it be for this reason that they have now placed the camera in the other room, the lower one, and don't let us see what's there? But how? If there was nothing, why do you need from 1968 to 2025 to try again from a different position, spending another $1,400 million?
$1,800,000 it costs. $1,400,000 the camera for taking Monic photographs costs.
To this project, I've worked from 12 to 15 university institutes worldwide, with the contribution, it seems, of 30 or 32 people doing a photograph every 8 months, because muons are needed. If there are not muons, the film does not get exposed. No Sir Wolfram Picard, no one, however, was impressed by the fact that we conducted a research and discovered 99.9% more of all the things there are without spending a damn penny staying at home.
The problem there is, you see,
What all the newspapers trumpeted with great fanfare at the time of the famous scan pyramid is we found 2 voids, one big and one little. The big void, which you see in the center,